Darren Ziegler sat in his office, staring at the latest employee satisfaction reports. The numbers weren't just bad, they were alarming. Complaints about warehouse conditions, high turnover, and management mistreatment were piling up. He had inherited the company from his father 3 years ago, expanding it to 10 warehouses nationwide. But somewhere along the way, he had lost touch with what was really happening on the ground. He had tried fixing things through corporate memos, new policies, and meetings with his district managers, but nothing changed. He needed to see for himself. That's how he found himself standing outside one of his own warehouses, dressed in a worn-out hoodie, steel-toe boots, and a fake employee badge reading Daniel. He had grown out his beard and wore glasses, nothing too dramatic, just enough to make him look like an average new hire. This location was one of the worst rated in the company, and he had never personally met the employees here. It was the perfect place to start. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of cardboard and grease. Forklifts beeped as they maneuvered around pallets, and workers moved in a hurried, almost frantic manner. He spotted a stocky man in his 40s barking orders near the loading dock. The name tag read, Bill, Warehouse Manager. Darren approached cautiously. "Hey, I'm Daniel, the new hire." Bill barely glanced at him.
"Great.
"You'll be on inventory sorting. Follow Jason." He pointed at a young guy, barely 20, with shaggy brown hair and a nervous expression. Jason led him toward the back, where the shelves stretched high above them. "You new to warehouse work?" he asked, lifting a heavy box onto a conveyor. "Yeah, first day." Darren mimicked him, hoisting a box. Jason chuckled. "You'll get used to it.
Just keep your head down."
"Bill's in a mood today." Darren raised an eyebrow. "Bad day." Jason hesitated, glancing toward the front.
"He's always like that."
"Yells a lot. If you screw up, he won't let you forget it." Darren frowned. Management was supposed to support employees, not intimidate them. He decided to observe more before jumping to conclusions. Hours passed, and Darren quickly realized the warehouse was short-staffed. Workers were rushing to meet quotas, sweating through their shirts. Jason barely took a break, hustling between aisles, scanning items, and lifting boxes twice his size. "Do you ever slow down?" Darren asked after seeing Jason skip his water break. Jason shrugged. "If I do, I'll fall behind. And Bill." He trailed off but didn't need to finish the sentence. Bill stormed in a few minutes later, scanning the room like a hawk. His eyes locked onto Jason, who was wiping sweat from his forehead. "What the hell are you doing?" Bill snapped. Jason stiffened. "Just catching my breath, sir." Bill scoffed. "Catching your breath? You think this is recess?" "Maybe if you worked harder, we wouldn't be behind schedule." Darren clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay silent. He needed to see how far this went. Jason didn't argue, just nodded, and went back to work. The day dragged on, and Darren's legs ached from standing. He noticed other employees avoiding Bill, keeping their heads down. The atmosphere was tense, like everyone was waiting for the next explosion. Then it happened. Jason was rushing to stack boxes when one slipped from his grip, hitting the ground with a loud thud. Bill's face turned red. "Are you stupid or just useless?" he hissed. Jason flinched. "I'm sorry, sir. It was an accident." "An accident? You're nothing but a screw-up," Bill sneered. "You should be grateful you even have a job here." Darren froze. His heart pounded. Jason's face burned with humiliation, his hands clenched into fists. He looked like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. He just bent down and picked up the box, shoulders hunched. Darren had seen enough. He exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. He wasn't going to blow his cover, yet not here, not now. But Bill had just made a serious mistake. Because the boss was watching. And this wasn't going to slide. Darren forced himself to keep moving, grinding through the rest of the shift. His muscles ached from the repetitive motions, but the real weight pressing on him wasn't physical, it was the toxic energy radiating from management. The way Bill operated wasn't just harsh, it was destructive. Employees weren't just tired, they were afraid. By the time the shift ended, Jason looked drained. His shoulders sagged as he slumped onto a metal bench near the lockers. Darren sat beside him, peeling off his worn gloves. "You okay?" he asked casually, careful not to push too hard. Jason exhaled sharply, running a hand through his damp hair. "Yeah. Just another day." Darren studied him for a moment. "That kind of stuff happen a lot?" Jason hesitated before nodding.
Yeah.
Bill's got favorites. If you're not one of them, you're fair game. A warehouse worker with a shaved head and a grease-streaked uniform overheard and scoffed as he passed by. Fair game? More like target practice. He yanked open his locker, shaking his head. Guy's been like that for years. Complaints don't go anywhere. No one listens. Darren absorbed that information in silence. Another worker, a woman with calloused hands and sharp eyes, chimed in. Management only cares about numbers. Bill keeps the quotas up, so they don't ask questions. Darren's stomach tightened. If what they were saying was true, then corporate, including himself, had been turning a blind eye. Jason stood abruptly. "I should get going. Got another shift tomorrow." Darren nodded, watching him walk off. He stayed seated, staring at the scuffed floor. He had built this company on principles of hard work and respect, but somewhere along the way, that vision had been lost. He couldn't let it continue. The next morning, he arrived early, slipping into the warehouse before the main workday began. Employees trickled in, rubbing their eyes and stretching sore limbs. Some chatted quietly, but most moved with robotic efficiency, already bracing for the day ahead. Bill arrived last. He strode in with the confidence of someone who knew he had control. He didn't greet anyone. Instead, he scanned the room, looking for someone to correct. His gaze landed on Jason, who was adjusting the straps on a heavy pallet. "What are you waiting for? An invitation?" Bill's voice cut through the air. "Move it." Jason flinched but obeyed. Darren clenched his jaw. He needed to see more, but his patience was wearing thin. Midway through the shift, a forklift beeped loudly as it backed up. The driver, a lanky man in his 30s, miscalculated the angle and clipped the edge of a shelving unit. A few boxes tumbled to the floor. The entire warehouse seemed to pause, waiting. Bill stormed over. "Are you blind?" The driver's face went pale. I misjudged the turn." Bill's lip curled. "You misjudged? That's your excuse." He gestured toward the scattered boxes. "Do I need to start hiring people who actually know how to do their damn jobs?" Darren watched the driver's hands tighten around the wheel. He wasn't just embarrassed, he was scared. Bill turned his wrath toward Jason next. "Why are you standing there? Clean it up." Jason moved quickly, kneeling to gather the fallen items. Darren had seen enough. He strode forward, his pulse steady, but his resolve unshakable. Bill barely spared him a glance. "What do you want?" Darren met his eyes. "I want you to explain something to me." Bill narrowed his gaze. "Explain what?" Darren pulled off his employee badge and let it drop to the floor. The room went silent. Workers stopped what they were doing, eyes widening as realization sank in. Darren straightened to his full height. "Explain why you think it's acceptable to treat people like this." Bill's face twisted in confusion for a split second before recognition dawned. His mouth opened, then closed. The warehouse was dead quiet. Darren let the silence drag. Let Bill feel the weight of it. When he finally spoke again, his voice was calm, controlled. "I own this company, and I just spent 2 days watching you tear down the people who keep it running." Bill swallowed hard. "Sir, Darren held up a hand.
Don't.
"Just don't." He turned, scanning the room. "I came here undercover to understand what was really happening in my warehouses. And what I saw." His gaze landed on Jason, then shifted to the forklift driver. "It's unacceptable." Some workers looked hopeful. Others seemed wary, as if they couldn't believe real change could happen. Darren turned back to Bill. You've had authority here for years. And from what I've seen, you've abused it. Bill's face reddened. You were just making people afraid to come to work. Just creating a toxic environment that makes good workers quit. Just ensuring that no one speaks up because they think nothing will change. Bill's mouth snapped shut. Darren exhaled, shaking his head. You're done here. A murmur spread through the crowd. Bill's expression flickered between shock and anger, but he didn't argue. He must have known there was no point. Darren turned toward the employees. Things are going to change. This wasn't just about one bad manager. It was about fixing a broken system. And he was going to make sure it happened. Bill stood motionless, his face tight with shock. The workers kept their distance, watching cautiously. No one cheered. No one spoke. It was as if they were waiting to see if this was real, if the man who had ruled over them with intimidation was actually finished. Darren didn't waver. He turned to the assistant manager, a wiry man in his early 50s with graying hair and a clipboard tucked under his arm. The name tag pinned to his uniform read Carl. You're the second in command here? Darren asked. Carl nodded, shifting his stance. Yes, sir. Do you have any idea how bad things have gotten under Bill? Carl's fingers tightened around his clipboard. He glanced at Bill, then back at Darren. I do, he admitted. But I wasn't in a position to change much. Every time someone tried to speak up, they were either ignored or pushed out. Some just stopped trying. Darren studied him. Carl's expression wasn't defensive, just tired. He looked like a man who had learned to pick his battles, even if it meant letting something slide. That stops now, Darren said. I need people who are willing to step up and fix this.
Can you do that?
Carl hesitated, then gave a firm nod.
Yes.
If we're actually allowed to make changes, I can do that. You will be. Darren turned his attention back to the workers. Things are going to be different, but I need to hear from you. What's actually happening here? At first, no one spoke. Then Jason shifted from foot to foot, glancing around before clearing his throat. His voice was careful, as if he still wasn't sure this was safe to say out loud. The quotas. They're impossible some days. We don't have enough people, but we're expected to hit the same numbers no matter what. A woman near the back crossed her arms. And if we don't, we get written up. Another worker, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, added, breaks barely exist. Technically we get them, but Bill would always find ways to make sure we didn't take them. Either he'd pile on extra work or call someone out in front of everyone for slacking off. Darren absorbed every word, his jaw tightening. He had seen the exhaustion in their faces, but hearing it laid out like this made it clear how deep the problem ran.
Carl sighed.
And safety. It's been overlooked. We've had injuries that should have been reported, but Bill didn't want anything on record that might make him look bad. People got pressured into working through it or just not saying anything. That hit Darren hard. He had built this company believing in hard work, but never at the expense of safety. If injuries were being covered up, that meant workers had been suffering just to keep things running. He exhaled slowly. Effective immediately, quotas will be reevaluated. No more impossible numbers. No more ignoring safety. And breaks? You take them. No exceptions. A murmur rippled through the group. Some looked hopeful. Others still seemed skeptical. One of the older employees, a man with a grizzled beard and cautious eyes, crossed his arms. You can say that now, but what happens when you leave? Every time we've had someone come through from corporate, nothing actually changed. Darren met his gaze. I'm staying long enough to make sure this isn't just talk. That got their attention. More people straightened, interest flickering in their expressions. Jason spoke up again, quieter this time. Does that mean Bill's really gone? Darren didn't even glance in Bill's direction. Yes. Bill let out a sharp breath, his fists clenched. You're making a mistake. Darren finally looked at him. The mistake was letting this go on for as long as it did. Bill's jaw worked like he wanted to argue, but he must have realized there was no point. He turned stiffly and walked toward the exit. No one stopped him. When the door swung shut behind him, the tension in the room shifted. It wasn't gone, but it had cracked just enough for something else to take its place. Cautious relief. Darren turned back to Carl. I'll be working here for the next few weeks, getting things back on track. I want a full report on everything that's been happening, the real numbers, the real conditions. Nothing buried, nothing polished. Carl gave a slow nod. Understood. Darren looked at the workers again. If you've got concerns, bring them to me. No more going unheard. A few nodded. Others still seemed unsure. He didn't blame them. Trust wasn't earned in a single speech. It had to be proven. Jason lingered as the group started dispersing. When Darren caught his eye, the younger man hesitated before speaking. I thought you were just another guy trying to get through the job, Jason admitted. Didn't expect you to be. You. Darren gave a small nod. I didn't expect to see what I saw either. But I should have. Jason glanced toward the exit where Bill had disappeared. He's really not coming back?
No.
Jason exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Good. Darren didn't say anything. He didn't need to. There was still a lot of work to do, but one thing was certain. This warehouse and the people inside it would never be the same again. Darren spent the next few weeks embedded in the warehouse, no longer undercover, but fully present. He didn't just issue new directives and leave. He worked alongside the employees, listening, observing, and making changes in real time. Without Bill looming over them, the atmosphere shifted. At first, the workers were hesitant, unsure if the new promises would hold. But as the days passed, trust began to take root. One of the first things Darren implemented was a structured break schedule that couldn't be overridden by management. He also made sure the staffing shortages were addressed, approving additional hires so the existing team wasn't constantly overworked. The unrealistic quotas were adjusted, and safety protocols were reinforced with mandatory daily check-ins. Carl stepped into a more hands-on leadership role, and Darren kept a close eye on him. So far, Carl seemed genuinely invested in turning things around. He wasn't overly friendly, but he was fair, and that was what mattered. One afternoon, Darren walked the floor, checking in with workers. He found Jason near the loading dock, carefully securing a pallet. Without the constant pressure from Bill, Jason seemed more focused, his movements steady instead of rushed. Darren watched for a moment before approaching. Jason noticed him and set the pallet jack aside, wiping his hands on his work pants. The younger man looked more at ease these days, but there was still something cautious in his expression. Darren leaned against a nearby stack of crates. How's it going? Jason adjusted his gloves. Better. Feels different without someone breathing down my neck every second. Darren nodded. That's the goal. You've been here a while. What's something I haven't fixed yet? Jason hesitated, glancing toward the other workers before answering. Honestly?
Pay.
A lot of guys here are just scraping by. Some of them are working extra shifts just to cover rent. Darren had been expecting that. He had already been reviewing wage structures across the company, but hearing it directly from an employee solidified its urgency. He pushed off the crates. I'm working on something. Expect an announcement soon. Jason gave a small nod, seeming satisfied with that. Later that day, Darren gathered the entire staff in the break area. Some leaned against tables. Others stood with arms crossed, waiting. Darren kept his tone direct. Starting next month, wages are increasing across all warehouse roles. No one here should have to work overtime just to stay afloat. A ripple of disbelief spread through the group. Some exchanged glances, as if waiting for a catch. One of the senior employees, a woman who had been with the company for over a decade, spoke up. This isn't just temporary? Darren shook his head.
Permanent.
I've already signed off on it. A few murmurs of approval passed through the crowd. One of the forklift operators let out a low whistle, shaking his head. Darren wasn't done. There's one more thing. We're setting up an employee advisory board. A few of you will meet with leadership every quarter to keep things in check. That way, if something isn't working, we fix it before it gets out of control. This time, the reaction was more immediate. People nodded, some even cracking small smiles. Carl spoke up from the side. I'll be overseeing the board on site, making sure the feedback gets straight to corporate. Darren met his gaze, then turned back to the employees. This place doesn't run without you. I should have been more involved a long time ago. That's changing now. The workers absorbed his words, and this time, there was no hesitation in their response. One by one, they nodded in approval. As the meeting wrapped up, Jason lingered near the edge of the group. When Darren caught his eye, the younger man gave him a short nod, not over the top, not exaggerated, just a quiet acknowledgement of everything that had happened. Darren returned the nod. Things had changed. And this time it was for good. Darren spent the following weeks making sure the changes weren't just promises on paper but real, tangible improvements that employees could feel. He wasn't naive, he knew that fixing a culture of fear and exhaustion wouldn't happen overnight. But if there was one thing he was certain of, it was that leadership had to be present, not just in boardrooms but on the ground, where the real work happened. One afternoon, he walked through the warehouse with Carl, reviewing the latest efficiency reports. Without Bill's oppressive management style, productivity had actually increased. Workers were taking their scheduled breaks, but they were also sharper, more engaged. The numbers reflected it: fewer mistakes, fewer delays. The fear that had once dominated the air had started to dissipate. Carl adjusted his glasses as he flipped through a clipboard. We've had fewer sick days this month. Guess when people aren't overworked to their breaking point, they don't call out as much. Darren studied the floor. It was subtle, but the energy had shifted. Workers moved with purpose, not panic. Conversations were happening where there used to be only silence. He spotted Jason near the shipping dock, carefully wrapping a pallet. The younger man had become more confident in his movements, no longer glancing over his shoulder every few minutes. Carl cleared his throat. There's something else. We've been getting applications again for the first time in a long while. Darren glanced at him. People actually want to work here now. Carl nodded. Word spreads fast. When a place has a reputation for burning people out, folks avoid it. But when wages go up, conditions improve, and management isn't out for blood, people start reconsidering. It was a confirmation Darren hadn't even realized he was waiting for. The warehouse wasn't just recovering, it was becoming a place where people wanted to be. Later that evening, he sat in his office, reviewing long-term strategies to ensure these improvements weren't temporary. A knock on the door interrupted his concentration. Jason stepped in, looking slightly out of place in the corporate setting. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. Carl said you wanted to see me? Darren gestured for him to sit.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about your future here. Jason's posture stiffened slightly, as if bracing for something he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. Darren leaned forward. You're sharp. You work hard. And more importantly, you've got a good read on people. I think you'd be a great fit for a supervisory role. Jason blinked. A supervisor? Darren nodded. We're restructuring leadership across the warehouses, making sure the right people are in place. You've been here long enough to understand what works and what doesn't. More than that, you care about the people around you. Jason looked down at his hands, quiet for a moment. I've never really thought about moving up. Darren smiled slightly. Maybe it's time to start. Jason exhaled, considering. What if I mess it up? Darren shook his head. The fact that you're even worried about that tells me you won't. Jason sat with the offer for a long while before finally nodding. I'll do it. Darren extended his hand. Jason shook it, still looking slightly overwhelmed, but also determined. As Jason left, Darren leaned back in his chair. The changes were real. The company was evolving. And for the first time in a long time, he knew he was leading it in the right direction.